So let's talk about something that's really at the heart of American politics right now. This clash between modern political rhetoric and the philosophical ideas the country was actually built on. It's a story about facts, power, and, well, the huge difference between a president and a king. Let's dig in.
We're going to start with just one number, 30,573. According to a database kept by the Washington Post, that's how many false or misleading claims were made by President Donald Trump during his 4 years in office. I mean, that's about 21 claims a day. And that number, that sheer scale, is really our starting point because it makes you ask a pretty fundamental question about truth in our public life.
And that question brings us right to the core of this whole thing, which this quote just frames perfectly. What happens to a democracy when the whole idea of a shared, verifiable reality is up for grabs? I mean, if we can't even agree on the basic facts, how are we supposed to have a rational debate about anything? Look, this isn't just about individual slip-ups or misstatements. As the source material argues, what we're seeing is a challenge to the very foundation of the Enlightenment. You know, that whole belief that we can discover objective facts through evidence and reason, and that those facts can create some common ground for us to stand on. To really get why this is such a profound challenge, we've got to rewind way back. The United States was basically founded as a giant experiment, and it was specifically designed to be the exact opposite of a monarchy. It was a radical rejection of a system where one person's word was basically law. And the intellectual DNA for this experiment? It came from thinkers like John Milton and Thomas Paine. And these guys weren't just arguing about taxes or borders. They were making a really deep philosophical argument about where power should come from and what it means to be a citizen instead of just a subject. And just look at how clearly this lays out the difference. In a monarchy, right, the king's power comes from God. It's absolute. He doesn't have to answer to the people. A republic, it flips that script completely. Power comes from the people who hold the ultimate authority. The whole system relies on reason and consent, not just blind obedience. And this idea goes deep. John Milton, in his theological writings, argued that even God doesn't want blind, passive obedience. He values obedience that comes from reason and free choice. And that idea, that choice and reason are everything, well, it became a political cornerstone for this new republic. Thomas Paine, in Common Sense, broke it down really simply. He basically said government isn't some divine thing handed down from on high. Nope. It's a practical tool created by people for people. It exists to solve a problem, our own human flaws. So its main job is to serve the public good, not the will of some ruler. Okay, so with all that historical context in our back pocket, let's jump back to today. How does this foundation of reason and consent help us understand a modern concept like, say, truthful hyperbole? This term was actually defined in Donald Trump's own book. It's presented as a sales tactic, right? A way to play to people's fantasies. The key phrase here is innocent form of exaggeration. But, you have to ask, what happens when that so-called innocent exaggeration flat out contradicts verifiable facts? Well, let's look at a few examples from the source material. The claim about thousands cheering on 9/11 in New Jersey, that was a rumor that had been debunked for years. The idea that the U.S. was the highest tax nation, data from the OECD showed the opposite. And the claim that President Obama founded ISIS, that was repeated, even when an interviewer tried to offer a softer way to phrase it, which suggests the point was the assertion itself, not whether it was factually true. And this quote, which comes from reporter Leslie Stahl, kind of lays the strategy bare to undermine the credibility of the press itself. It suggests the whole point of the rhetoric isn't just to sell an idea, but to make objective facts seem totally irrelevant. So you see, this moves beyond just words. It starts to get into actions that really test the guardrails of the republic. The institutions and the norms that are supposed to keep power in check. For instance, the press. It's supposed to be a core way we keep our leaders accountable. Calling it the enemy of the American people isn't just an insult, it's a direct challenge to its entire role in the system, a role that's supposed to separate a republic from a monarchy, where a ruler can't be questioned. And then there's the legal accountability, another one of those crucial guardrails. It gets a little complicated, but an analysis in Just Security breaks down a big Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity. The gist is, the ruling gives a president protection from being prosecuted for their official acts, even if those acts are allegedly illegal. And the fear, as that analysis puts it, is that this creates a presidency that's untethered from the law, which would totally shift the balance of power the founders set up. But here's the thing. Those official guardrails aren't the only check on power. In a republic, the people have the final say, and we see citizens pushing back with things like protests and public art. This temporary sculpture on the National Mall, for example, was a creative way to demand accountability, a citizen-led effort, using the very rights the system was built to protect. Which brings us to that famous line, often attributed to Benjamin Franklin. The survival of a republic isn't a sure thing. It depends on all of us upholding certain principles. And maybe the most important one is the line between what we believe and what we can actually prove. You've probably heard this one before. It just nails the whole issue, doesn't it? A republic is designed to handle all sorts of different opinions, but that debate needs a common playground of verifiable facts to happen on. Once that common ground is gone, the whole system is at risk. And the stakes here are incredibly high. The political theorist Hannah Arendt, who wrote about the origins of totalitarianism, pointed out that a crucial first step for authoritarian movements is that they don't just lie. They work to build an entire alternate reality, a fictitious world where their wild claims feel more real to their followers than actual reality. So that's where we're going to leave it, with this one question. The whole American experiment was built on the idea that truth is knowable and that it's the foundation for governing ourselves. It was designed to prevent the arbitrary rule of a king whose reality was the only one that mattered. So what happens to that experiment when the line between a personal opinion and a shared fact is no longer clear? That's really a question for all of us.